But I'm contemplating whether we even want to like set a little, like even drop in and set a kind of a tone. I'm
Yeah.
I'm coming off of a week hanging out with Soul Family, and they're so sort of wise and further down the path of healing. And I learned so much from them. And I became really aware in this past week how I like to get buy-in from people and I like to convince them very much from this chakra and like being very cerebral and here's the words and here's the science. And we're going to talk about all of that. But they gently and lovingly reminded me love is the most healing vibration. And so I wonder if, I mean, I'm going super way off the deep end, hippy dippy right off the bat,
You're in the right place.
but maybe we even just start with like a one moment, everyone who's participating, we just drop in and feel that exchange of giving and receiving love.
I
So let's
mean,
close our eyes.
yes.
Okay. Thanks for rolling with that, Amanda.
I need it. We all need it.
We
And
need it.
people will be listening for months and dropping in with us.
So yes, ready for the first question.
Okay, amazing. Well, so not in keeping with the tone that you just set, but I feel I feel like we could do a two-part because I actually um there's so much like initial stuff. I feel like we need to, everybody just wants to hear from you around false anxiety.
Mhm.
Maybe is gonna, we're gonna have that like 3D doctor hat on for part of it.
Yeah.
And then I feel like if you're ever up for it, we'd come back and do another session on true anxiety, which I feel gets really probably more into the stuff that you and I spend our nights and days when we're not in office thinking about, and you kind of like dwindle to that place, and our communities too. um but there are a lot of false anxiety questions out there. um
There's no shame in false anxiety questions. I'm all about that. It's the low-hanging fruit where we can
it
begin.
it
And
is, I feel like we need, this will be volume one, low hanging fruit, and then we'll meet again for top of the tree gems. Um, but could you lay out for us just very quickly false anxiety versus true anxiety? And I know we could spend a week talking about that, but in your like elevator pitch.
yeah, here's the elevator pitch. So basically, the way I was taught to think about anxiety, it was the DSM, our Bible in mental health, Diagnostic Statistical Manual, where we're saying anxiety is OCD or panic disorder or generalized anxiety disorder. And I realized that classification system was not steering management in a meaningful way. It was intended to tell me, should this patient go on meds? Should this patient go to cognitive behavioral therapy? These aren't my first line treatments anyway. So it was somewhat of a meaningless classification. And it really came with this stamp or label that said, this is you, it's genetic, it's your destiny, it's your identity, and now you carry it forward for the rest of your life. And that did not ring true for me, partly because I witnessed in my own body and in so many of my patients that we can address the underlying root causes of what's contributing to our mental health issues. And sometimes diagnoses just no longer become relevant. And so I don't believe in that idea of like, this is you and this is a genetic destiny. So all of this is to say I had to come up with a new system of classification that made sense, but also helped guide treatment in my practice. So the way I think about it is that false anxiety is avoidable anxiety. It has a physical basis. Something has gotten our physical body out of balance, trips us into a stress response, which creates a state of anxiety. And we can get strategic about what's contributing to that anxiety and we can eliminate it. And I don't call it false to invalidate the very real suffering. I was in a state of false depression for many years. This was life altering suffering. It's real, but there is underlying straightforward physical cause and a straightforward path out. But then true anxiety, on the other hand, is not something to be pathologized. It's not something that we can easily solve by going gluten-free or getting off of coffee. It's really something that it's a nudge from within. It's our true north. It's encouraging us to slow down, get still, and listen to a message that we kind of know, but we're sort of ignoring. And it can be something very small, it could be something really grand, but it's usually reminding us, hey, there's something that's not right in our personal life, in our community, in the world at large. Maybe we need to change our work. Maybe we need to call our grandma. Maybe there's some bigger calling or some artistic expression that we're blocked and not letting, not making manifest in the world. And so true anxiety is really something to listen to and honor.
Yeah. And my personal experience and my guess is with most people living in the Western world that you have both, but that once you accumulate all of this false anxiety, it's typically like the antibiotics that you've been fed as a child and kind of feels like it snowballs from there, and the mold in your house, and the other medical procedures that may not have served you. And then almost feels like another layer with that false anxiety would be perhaps the childhood diagnoses you received and then the drugs that went along with it, whether it was, a learning disability that came with speed, or depression, that, whatever that means at this point, and the drugs that came with that. And you go on that journey to really clean up your diet and lifestyle and detox and take care of yourself and feed yourself those nutrients. And then you wake up 3, 5, 10 years later and realize, oh, there's also a lot of true anxiety slash trauma slash however you want to relate to it. But you kind of need to get through that biological layer first to really like sift down to what's really there.
That's exactly right. I always start with that in my practice. It's the low-hanging fruit. It's also the quick wins, which when you're struggling with anxiety or depression, you can feel really, everything feels sort of defeating and you can be demoralized. You can feel like, what's the point? It's hard to get out of the bed. It's hard to shower. It's hard to, especially with anxiety, like confront something anxiety provoking. So you feel so blocked in so many ways. And a lot of the ways that I can address false anxiety for a patient are not even all that difficult. It's not, some of them are, like overhauling your diet can be tough, but adding in magnesium glycinate at bedtime, adding in a spoonful of almond butter to keep your blood sugar stable, like that's not so much skin off our back. That's usually pretty easy to add in. And then it's like a quick win. Now suddenly you're feeling a little bit better. You have a little bit of positive momentum. And once you've addressed all of these false anxieties, it clears the air and it makes it a lot easier to discern that's a true anxiety. That's not something to try to fix. That's not something wrong with me. It's actually something right with me. This is my inner compass, viscerally connected to what's not right.
Yeah. And then you have more that strength and stamina, and you feel like you are reliable and safe, and can dig into those things. Because I think, it's like when your blood sugar is all over the place and your gut's not optimized and you've got anxiety, which is a term you coined that I love. So many things. You're on caffeine, sugar, alcohol, you've got systemic inflammation, like all of the things that, we all know about. But that makes for a space, a body home, a mind that you feel like is not dependable and you can't trust to even get you through the day. So forget about opening the cans of worms.
I think that's exactly right. And I think you're touching upon something really deep and profound. And maybe I'll keep the answer very concise so we can do the next question. But when our gut is unwell, when our blood sugar is swinging all over the place or our hormones are off, it does not necessarily feel easy to trust ourselves. We don't know what's up, what's down, what's right or wrong. I think these are some of the ways we ground in our body and have a hotline to our intuition and kind of know our truth. And so when they're fuzzy, when they're on shaky ground, it can be harder to just know ourselves and know where we stand. So all of this is to say, false anxiety, there's no shame in addressing this. It even relates to the deeper psychospiritual aspect of anxiety.
It does. It's the gateway to some of that. Last little point that I'd love you to touch upon, and then I feel like, okay, we've set that tone and we can hop into just the questions that people have around it. But and I think you just said it, there's the part where it's hard to trust yourself, to get through the day, to deal with larger issues. But there's a lot of, I know there's like this whole campaign around mental health and prioritizing that and no shame in that. Yet there's still a lot of stigma and shame around it, particularly for women. I would say, I love my husband and he's a kind person, but when the gloves go off and like people are getting nasty, first place he goes to is, are you getting your period? Using words like hysterical. And like, mind you, I'm sitting in a chair and my voice is not raised, but that really triggers me. And I
Mm.
think he knows it, and that's why he's doing it. And it's a little tactic. Sorry if he's listening. But I've received that my whole life, whether it's a parent or a teacher or a partner, or I'm sure there are workspaces. There's still so much shame around that. And for women, it seems to really be around hormones.
Mm. Where to begin? I'm right there with you on this. Um, Coming to you from my luteal phase, so which has been very apparent in my household today. And I think that I think that there's deep cultural misogyny in everything we do, but certainly in the word hysterical, in the way that we call PMS like, bitchiness and all of this. And I think that the reframe that I really am trying to fight for in my life is that when it comes to our luteal phase, so the second half of our cycle, the first half of our cycle, our follicular phase, when we're really in a sort of a estrogen tone, that's usually not the problem. We're usually in a pretty decent mood. Things roll off our shoulders. We feel social. We feel oriented outward. We're kind of chill. We're what the world wants us to be in our follicular phase. But then in the luteal phase, the gloves come off. Things get a little bit more, we feel a sense of like, hey, that bothers me. And there's more of a sense of eh, justice or injustices really, or what get to us. And I think that with the luteal phase, I think that there is a false component to it and a true component to it. And no question, when we're acting irritable and someone says, are you about to get your period? It's pouring gas on the flames. It's such an invalidating statement because it's basically saying, oh, what you're complaining about right now is not real. You're just out of your right mind.
Right.
And that's where I think we really get it wrong. So the true component of the luteal phase is that this is not us having a distorted sense of reality. It's truth serum. We're very aware of what's not right. We're actually, I think, more clued into it than usual. And in an ideal world, we would let that fuel action, especially in the follicular phase. So it's almost like luteal phase reveals truth, and then we can set an intention and translate that into purposeful action in our follicular phase when we have more energy. So when we're bothered by something in the luteal phase, we're a little rough around the edges, we're a little bit more irritable, we might not have the presence of mind to handle it calmly, but there's always something really valid about what's bothering us in those moments. That said, I do think that in this modern environment, we are in a false anxiety state in our late luteal phase. And this has to do with a debated concept of estrogen dominance, which I think, conventional allopathic doctors can debate it all day. To me, it feels like of physiologic inevitability. It's obvious that this is happening, partly because we're exposed to so many xenoestrogens or things in our environment that mimic estrogen. So things like plastics and pesticides and, not conventional personal care products, conventional cleaning products, air pollution, all of this. We have so much excess estrogen. And then we have deficient progesterone. And that has to do with the fact that we're chronically stressed. So our body shunts the precursor pregnenolone towards making our stress hormone, cortisol, instead of making progesterone. And then some of us don't eat egg yolks or take statins, and we're having even further lowering of our precursors. We need cholesterol to make this hormone. So rather than having a little bit more estrogen than progesterone, we have a lot more estrogen and a lot less progesterone. And it's this larger gradient that I think makes the late luteal phase such a disaster. And so we have an exaggerated experience of PMS where we are having a bigger dip in our mood, where some of my patients even have really dark thoughts, even suicidal thoughts in the PMS period. I think that's an indication of imbalance. So I'll be the first to say, whatever truth is coming up in your luteal phase, let's not invalidate it. Let's actually really honor it. And we want to work on supporting our hormones so that we're not suffering unnecessarily in those days before we bleed.
I'm thinking about giving that answer to anyone who got me next month. Let's honor my intuitive wisdom. And yes, agreed. I have a quick question for you there. And I feel like this is a resounding theme in our community is we have a lot of women that, and myself included, okay, we've gotten rid of plastics. We're so hyper conscious about anything that's in our environment, on our body, what we eat, where meats are coming from. I mean, like really, really dialed in to where excess estrogen could be coming from. And there's still a dominance. I don't expect you to have the answer. I think, like I've worked with acupuncture and TCM. I think, stress management has also been huge, just daily things. But I'm wondering, do you think it makes sense to, and this is very allopathic of me to say, but would you start supplementing with progesterone? Or do you think that's not really going to work because you're not getting to the heart of the issue?
I'm not like dogmatically opposed to it, but I think there's 3 steps that even the most dialed in, plastic-free, natural beauty ones of us could still improve upon just to see if that can improve an estrogen dominance. One would be actually, I mean, I'm doing it right now, right? I'm outside of my normal environment. I'm drinking municipal tap water. And
I was about to join you. I don't have municipal tap water.
And this is an issue, right? Because drinking non-municipal tap water has issues to it. It can be prohibitively expensive. It can be environmentally and ecologically problematic. This isn't an easily solved thing. At home, I have both a reverse osmosis filter built in under the sink in my kitchen, and that's for what I cook with. And then I actually drink things like Mountain Valley spring water as my drinking water. Municipal tap water, so clear, so harmless. We know it's safe, it won't kill us, but it is our pharmaceutical residues are too small to filter out. So we are drinking all of the birth control pill and the hormone replacement therapy, along with the statins and Zyprexa and Prozac that the population is peeing out. So basically, we're getting an interesting dose of estrogen even in our tap water. That's step 1. Step 2 is the fact that we do need to open up our drainage pathways because estrogen recirculates. And if we're not pooping regularly and really well, if we're not sweating, like doing an infrared sauna, if our liver is overburdened, we might want to support our liver function and just in all the different ways we can support our body getting rid of what it's holding on to. So that's two steps. And there was a third one the third one is that we sometimes overlook the role of progesterone. So we might have done everything in our power to get rid of excess estrogen, but the real kicker is can we maintain healthy progesterone levels? And that's where sometimes our habits of being so wound up and obsessive about how we live so well is even contributing, because this is the one where stress comes into play. And it's really hard to manage stress. It requires sometimes pretty dramatic changes to our lifestyle, like saying no, doing less, maybe working differently, having a different relationship to money coming in, coming out. All, sometimes we're living in chaotic environments. Sometimes we don't have our needs met. Sometimes we're in an unsafe environment. There's so many ways that stress isn't always an easy fix. So working there is sometimes the sort of last frontier when it comes to improving the estrogen dominance.
I love it. Thank you.
Right.
And if I could take you back, actually, and this is going to touch a few things at once, and so we can, you can parse it out, but I'll kind of throw it all out there, and then we'll go on a little journey. So I wanted to ask you specifically about, and I feel like we touched upon anxiety, menstrual cycle, lot of ladies chiming in with some questions. I actually had a particular, and then PCOS was another question around PCOS. I have a question particularly around PMDD, which you just talked about, and I'll tie it to this other thing that I really want to get into, which is I've never, I haven't experienced PMS in the cramping, breaking out, bloating, wild mood shifting. I just haven't had that in probably 15 years since really taking care and getting well. I got COVID in January. And I'll say it's the Omicron variant because it really does seem to be hitting people differently. I got it in January. It did not feel mild. Got through the acute infection and then feel like I'm just coming out of it, but it's been 7, 8 months wherever we are. And the first wild thing that I noticed, and it took me a couple of cycles to really like Google diagnose myself, but I was like, oh my God, I have PMDD. I've never experienced anything like this. The closest thing I've had to it has been like first trimester of pregnancy or postpartum, where I was witnessing thoughts that I've never had before and did not seem like they were coming from me. I had enough wherewithal to like not tell a story around it. It was just like very intrusive thoughts coming in, and then I'd pump the brakes and not let myself validate them with some story in my life. And so it was like, whoa, what is going on in my body?
Oh, wow. Okay. So, and a word for that is ego dystonic as opposed to ego syntonic. So something that's sort of like, well, that's not really me. As you said, intrusive thoughts, thoughts that really feel like, well, that's not consistent with how I view the world. That came in and feels a little bit incongruous.
Mhm.
So, okay, there's a lot to unpack here. PCOS, let's table for a second. We're going to come back to that. The COVID thing. So my mind goes to two main places. One is that there's something about, let's call it this spike protein,
Mhm.
because people have this reaction both from COVID and from the vaccine, which is a change to their bleeding, like especially their menstrual bleeding. So there's something happening there. I don't know. Is it with clotting? Is it an estrogen effect? Is it causing us to build more of a lining? It's confusing. But that is something that a lot of women have been reporting for a long time now. Of course, the medical system lagged in validating this concern. At first, it was, oh, a bunch of hysterical women complaining of something that's not real, until
And
finally,
conspiracy
that
theorists,
too.
hysterical women that
That's
didn't
true.
happening.
So we can just let that lie there. But so basically, yet again, women are not crazy in their assessment of what's going on in their bodies. And there is a change in bleeding patterns. So that's why just the fact that you say something changed with your period since COVID, my mind goes there. But this doesn't seem to be a change with bleeding. This is a change in mood. And that's where, is it still possible it relates to, is the COVID and vaccine effect estrogen related? Like, does it have to do with the buildup of the lining, or is it clotting related, or is it something else? I don't know. If it were estrogen related, I would say that can track with a change in mood. I think more likely this is a kind of subacute phase of how your body is working through that inflammation. And cerebral inflammation, like inflammation that's systemic, it's in the body, it's affecting the brain, impacts our mood. And you might be sort of resilient and your cup is full enough that that doesn't touch you the rest of the month. But in that vulnerable few days before your period, it's enough where, some of your resilience, some of that coping is kind of falling out from underneath you. And the inflammation is sort of that perfect storm of less resilience, inflammation still there, is sufficient to create a PMDD state. And so that would be probably where I would focus first, is how to support your body in once and for all resolving the chronic inflammation. I've noticed that, I mean, people do all kinds of interesting things right now, everything from taking antacids to things like Luvox, which is a interestingly kind of anti-inflammatory SSRI. I like to start a little less invasive and do things like infrared sauna consistently. But really thinking about that your body is like struggling to get a foothold on, it's, maybe there's still some impact of COVID that your body's slowly working through in the background. So how do we support your body in that way? Calibrating your immune system, making sure you're at optimal range with sunshine, vitamin D, with gut health, with things like turmeric that can kind of help encourage an immune system to sort of calm down. Chicken liver pate and these really nutrient dense things that could just give your immune system every nutrient it needs to work with. Rest. And so that's how I would think about it. And infrared sauna, I mean, like pretty consistently, like maybe daily for a period of time.
Okay, so then since you brought it up, I'm dying to get your thoughts on this. So that's how it started, the PMDD, and so like 1 month it'd be that, and then it would be extreme cramping, and then it would be extreme bleeding, and then it would be like cystic acne that would pop up on my back, like just stuff I've never had. And I was like, wow, at least it's relegated to this one period of the month. And then the cup completely spilled over and came crashing down. And this was, I guess, 4 months after the acute infection. I thought I had had a reinfection of COVID because I felt really sick. It was all of a sudden that like spiky fever thing. I mean, I feel like I know my immune system intimately enough, having had an autoimmune condition that's been in remission for years, but it was like, whoa, I know this feeling where it's the, if I overexerted myself with like a walk around the block, or even sometimes a work day where the mind
Mhm.
just went too hard, it would be that like little spiky fever feeling, a little bit of a sore throat, and then it would fall into just like extreme brain fog, like pretty scary brain fog.
Yeah.
And I kept testing because of the fever and the sore throat, nothing. And then I realized, okay, this is total immune system, like very autoimmune feeling. But the brain fog was quite scary. It would get to the point of like slurred speech.
Mhm.
And then I sort of fell into, I'd have these like spikes of that, be able to recalibrate with rest and with supplements. And then I sort of just like fell into the gutter of, oh my God, am I depressed? Is this just like low level depression, exhaustion, brain fog? I read about 5 times the section in your book, which I'm just going to call out because so many people are feeling this way, and just, sharing a little bit of my experience. So many people reached out and they were like, I didn't know what was happening. I thought I was depressed or had lost my creativity. But there's this one part in your book, I feel like I marked the page, but we'll describe it for people and maybe give them the notes. But you called it cytokine hypothesis.
Yeah. Yeah. So
So can you walk us through that? Because I thought it was really like, it was actually the most succinct, simple thing I've read. And I've read so much around inflammation and depression and neuroinflammation and exhaust, and you just put it so simply.
yeah. Oh, I think you're so astute to sort of connect the dots here, the cytokine hypothesis, this COVID effect, the brain fog, these all converge on the same concept. So basically, when you got to that moment where you're like, am I depressed? We culturally have been taught to say that that's the answer. Like, oh, this wasn't brain fog or slurred speech or burnout. This was depression. And, then we swoop in with a narrative of like, it's a chemical imbalance. It's, maybe we need to medicate it. Like, we have a whole story that we've been taught about that. But to say, like, am I depressed in a way? I think it's more accurate for us to think about that as a symptom or a word to characterize a constellation of symptoms than the final answer or the final diagnosis. What was happening in these moments was, I lack a perfect term for it, but your brain is basically saying like not functioning well, and that can show up as brain fog. And the slurred speech is like a little bit of an outlier, but we can talk more about that. But certainly brain fog, fatigue, and low mood are all the brain saying like, ouch, like I'm not optimal right now. Something's not working right. And it can be so many things, but one very common cause is inflammation. So the cytokine hypothesis, which I wish I could say is my term, it's not my term. It's like an established hypothesis. Full credit, I'll take it. It's an established alternative hypothesis of depression, and we've all come of age with what's called the monoamine hypothesis of depression. Monoamine is a term for our different neurotransmitters like serotonin. So basically, we've been taught to say depression is a serotonin imbalance, and it's actually only just 2 weeks ago now, a paper came out.
Were you partying? I mean,
I,
I thinking of you when it was just like in mass media across all headlines, it was debunked. I was
I'm
thinking,
I'm shocked because it usually just these things usually move more slowly and with more resistance. And now just everyone's suddenly on board with like what I've been like crying from the rooftops, like, let's think about mental health differently. This system isn't getting us the results we need. We need to open up and think about it differently. And like people are just ready to go now. So we're just moving faster as a culture these days, right? We're open. Um,
it
so
restored my faith in humanity, in a brighter future. I mean, that was, for anybody that is not following along with what we're saying,
yes,
it
thank you.
was, so there was this broad statement that there's little evidence that chemical imbalance causes depression, which is you just said it, the mono
Amine hypothesis.
hypothesis,
Yes.
which takes us to, so we were
Yeah.
celebrating that this is like mainstream now. What are all the pharmaceutical companies going to do? They'll, they'll come up with something new, I'm sure.
Well, I mean, it's so, I mean, up until now, that has always been, it's been a theory, a hypothesis, and it's been marketing. It's been a convenient story to sell SSRIs, to say, you have a chemical imbalance, your serotonin is low. This pill corrects your serotonin levels and therefore will treat your depression. That has always only ever been marketing. Can the meds be helpful? Yes, they can, for a whole slew of complicated, interesting reasons. And we can have that nuanced conversation if we want. Meds can be helpful. Like, this conversation does not mean if you're helped by meds, it turns out you're not. Like, that's not true. If you're helped, you're helped. That's a reason for celebration. But it just helps us expand our options and recognize, like, that was a story. And when we realize it was never really true, it opens us up to investigate, well, what are the real underlying causes of depression? Let's identify those and address those so we can get people relief. So all of this is to come back to the cytokine hypothesis. It's a competing hypothesis for depression, and it basically understands that sometimes, not always, but often, our state of depression correlates with how inflamed we are. And you can sort of see a correlation between how many cytokines or inflammatory markers are flowing around our bloodstream and impacting our brain, and how our mood is. And so we, in modern environment, are in a state of immune dysregulation. It's not to say we already have more immune activity or less immune activity. It's just very dysregulated. We have sometimes excessive inflammation, like if we are eating inflammatory foods. Sometimes we have a misfiring of the immune system where it's attacking self tissue, as is the case in autoimmune disease. Sometimes we're attacking benign stimuli, like with seasonal allergies. Sometimes our immune systems are underperforming, like when you see somebody with chronic Lyme, with chronic Epstein-Barr virus, with chronic, I think long COVID is an interesting question there. Sometimes our immune systems are failing to get a foothold on a manageable virus. And so it's, basically we're dysregulated. Our immune system is dysregulated. It's kind of not, it's not like honing in properly. And that, I think, is directly related to all these ways that modern life is giving our immune system the wrong inputs and conditions. Our gut is a very critical component of this. We lack the diverse ecosystem that helps train our immune system. Our vitamin D levels and lack of sunshine is another factor. Our chronic stress suppresses our immune activity. Steroid use is like a niche but kind of common impact on our immune activity. Sleep and our circadian dysregulation, how we're not getting that dose of darkness at night that helps our immune system do its work. So we're very immune dysregulated, and that shows up for a lot of people as depression.
Mm-hmm. So, and I feel like there's probably that's like a lifetime of work in itself, but can I get you to dive in with me on this one? So my lifestyle since putting an autoimmune condition into remission a while ago, that is but that's the main focus in my life. And I predominantly don't eat grains. I don't have alcohol. I don't have refined sugars. Caffeine, I'm sort of on and off with.
Same.
It's like I quit, I feel so great, blah, blah, blah. And then I'm like, I'm bored. And then the high is really good. And then that's really fun. And then I quit. And so, I feel like I have, there's an understanding there, at least with caffeine. And so I don't take myself into a detrimental place with it. I get sunshine. I'm up on all the supplements. I do regular blood panels just to make sure I'm not like slipping in to inflammation, that I'm not catching. So I do all the things. This experience with COVID really threw me for a loop, and I could, when it got to my brain, it's an interesting thing. Maybe I'm sure you can feel it. I'm sure people that are listening to us right now can feel it. Once you identify inflammation, you can actually feel it under your skin, like roving through your body. I could feel it in my brain.
Yeah.
And here is, so it would rev up. I wound up actually doing hyperbaric oxygen therapy. That was the only thing. I mean, I tried all the supplements, all the normal things, and I was like, just need to put the fire out. Nothing is working. So I wound up doing hyperbaric oxygen a few times kind of quickly together, and that radically helped.
Yeah.
And then for energy, I wound up doing a couple of NAD
Hmm.
infusions, and then I wound up supplementing with suppositories because they're cheaper and easier. That seemed to really help. Those were the two things. And then doing some lymphatic stimulation. So those three things, like, whoa, brought me back. And then I thought that the infrared sauna would be my best friend. And I noticed that every time I get in and do a sweat, I come out and it's really scary. It's like brain fog that's frightening and that slurred speech thing again. And then I have to go back to hyperbaric.
Oh, this is so important. Okay. So, um, I'm so glad you found hyperbaric, lymphatic drainage, like NAD, infusions, suppositories. It's all great. That's a fantastic approach. With infrared sauna, I really like the way Dr. Jess MD, she's named Jess Petros, but on Instagram her handle is Dr. Jess MD.
Yeah.
She has a really nice protocol around infrared sauna. And she basically appreciates like she calls it kill, bind, sweat. But basically, we need some people need a kind of antimicrobial going into it, and perhaps most importantly, a binder. So I think you go into a little bit of a healing crisis after a sauna because it's basically unleashing, it's unearthing a lot of stuff, gunk that's stuck, lymphatically and wherever it's hiding out in your body, it's getting opened up. And then it's kind of just sweating out, but also recirculating and just making you feel acutely sick afterward. So a binder, which there are a few different good binders out there. I think she uses Cellcore, but basically some combination of things like activated charcoal or some other things in there. Sometimes it's bentonite clay, things that will sop up and bind what's getting excavated so that it helps your body excrete it or eliminate it in one way or another. You wanted to add something there.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna check it out, and I'll check out the Cellcore too, because I was doing activated charcoal and chlorella, and I
Yeah.
just that's not enough.
It
Um,
can, it's tough because sometimes you also have to go like start low and slow with this because that might just be overwhelming your system. So, but it doesn't have to be infrared sauna. If you found a path with hyperbaric oxygen, NAD, like you could keep leaning into that and that's fine. You're not, um, it's not like a stone is unturned if you're not doing infrared sauna. It's just a nice option for some people. But I'm so glad you brought up the way there's intricacies to this path and it can sometimes overwhelm the system.
okay,
Yeah.
great. Thank you for that. And that's a great resource that I'll check up and follow up with, because there is some of that herc stuff. I don't know. I often just think like, man, 20 years later, I'm still herxing. Like sometimes you think it's the same with emotional stuff. You're like, really? 20 years later, I'm still uncovering new trauma. I'm like back to go. Do not collect $200.
Well, not only are we never done, but there's a kind of global, it's more complicated than this, but there's some kind of up leveling that might be happening. And this is I struggle to communicate this in a way that's adequately like let's first just establish like this pandemic, it's massive collective trauma, grief, loss. It's horrible. And so anything that I'm saying that's sort of spinning it positively, I don't mean to overlook how awful this is in so many millions of ways, impacting everybody in their own way. So, like, not bypassing everything that's terrible about it, but I
Mhm.
have to come up with for me, for my own resilience, some redeeming story for what the hell is happening on the earth right now. And so it's how I make sense of it and how I kind of spin a hopeful narrative for what we do with this going forward. And I feel on some level like, especially for intuitive people, as my friend Elise Lunan once put it, light workers with a big flashlight like yourself, it's like sometimes we go through the worst of it so that we can kind of we sort of, we have to go through it, feel it, figure out what is this? How do we work through it so that we can help others. I
Mhm.
feel like I've had a few versions of this in my life where um, it's almost like I'll be put through some kind of physical ordeal that then really helps me support a population struggling with it. And so, the fact that you're someone who can feel inflammation roving around your body, me too, right? So, like,
It's delightful and frightening.
yeah. And so basically, like, you're someone who can really tune in to what's happening on the body on the physical level and figure out how to support it and then offer up those suggestions to help others. And perhaps there is something in whatever is happening here that it's even more than physical. Like there is some kind of, um, I don't know, I think that's for each of us to figure out for ourselves, but it's a physical and psychospiritual worksing that I think is occurring right now. And you're being asked to move through that because they know you're capable of it and you're in a position to support others who are going through the same thing.
Just, the neighborhood canary. I like
Exactly.
myself as that your friend
Same here.
canary. That, is so lucky that I get to have conversations with you,
Fellow canaries.
Yeah, the canary that found the canary with a degree that has some more information for us.
God, getting that degree was quite the coal mine for my life. Yeah.
Oh, I can only imagine. But you know what? I have found that the canaries that do go through the whole medical complex, I mean, that puts you through such a unique experience that truly the people that are giving me hope, saving my life, helping all of us, most of you are women. You've been through that system. You've experienced the system personally at its worst. You've gotten to a place of realizing that it's really harming your patients and you've found your way out. And so, as awful as that experience is, I mean, that's the only hope I've got. It's the only hope people, in this community have. And I feel like it's really the only people that we trust at this point.
Yes, everything you just said, yes. And I mean, I barely survived, and I'm glad that I'm on the other side of it and able to, um, yeah, it's an honor to get to be in this position to support people, to figure this out, to figure out this brokenness and how do we fix it. I couldn't do anything else. It's a wonder to me because the whole time I was in my medical training, I would have recurrent nightmares that I was stuck on a train speeding in the wrong direction. I was like, I want to get a boyfriend. I want to like be, I was like, here are my priorities. And instead I'm working 36-hour shifts and burned out and exhausted. But I realize now I am exactly, yeah, in my purpose. And that's it's a fulfilling way to go through life. Doesn't mean it's easy. It can still be hard work, but to know that you're on track with purpose is a big yes. And it's a full body yes. And I really always want that for people I work with, is to kind of, how do we listen for where do we need to course correct and get into alignment with where our unique perspective and gifts and experiences and traumas help us help others. And I'm not saying life has to be purpose. I'm okay with like, I just want to enjoy the passage of time. That's a beautiful way to go through life too. But if somebody wants purpose.
I have some friends like that where they really embody that. They're like
Mhm.
deeply in their feminine, they're deeply present. Their life is all about, like their clothing and eating fresh fruits and their sexuality. And that actually really serves me. I'm not in that at all, but being able to like zoom through the week and then go just be with them for even 30 minutes. And, I do feel like we actually need people holding that.
And in a sort of meta way, joy and sensuality is also a very strong healing agent in our world. And so those people are in purpose, whether they realize they are or not. They're helping the rest of us. Um, I think it's a beautiful thing.
It is. I know. I
Yeah.
wish it could be more of mine, but I just don't. I don't know. I don't
It's
know
not
if I'm,
for everyone.
I don't know. My 70s. I'm like banking on my 70s about like sexuality and fruit and beautiful clothing. Um,
Fabrics, fruit, and sex. Yes, coming for us. For
um,
now, we are canaries,
for now, we're your
translating what we're taking in and putting it out into the world.
so kind of like zooming into this other thing because I thought this was so beautiful how you put this and succinct, and I think it's kind of anybody who's tuned into their to wellness and they've really seen the effects of it, and it's how they're getting through life, and I'm getting there because, and again, required reading, just read The Anatomy of Anxiety, and you can get into Dr. Vora's. You touch upon a little bit in your time in medical school, having some disordered eating coming up for you. And so that was really interesting reading about that experience. And not foreign to me. I don't think that I've ever truly had like disordered eating that I need to define in that way and get into. But you did talk about binge eating, and I certainly have had times in my life where I'm so stressed that I am eating in that way, or eating too late at night, or so that wasn't necessarily my question, wasn't there, but I did want to say, you really do touch upon it. So anybody that's, maybe actually feeling like, okay, I'm having disordered eating, or maybe you're not having disordered eating, but you're noticing that something about your life is driving you to this place of either needing to feel full or reaching for foods that are not serving you and you feel like you can't stop, or not eating enough and using hunger in that way. um, I implore you to read the book because it was really great. And then what you did talk about that I just want you to like briefly get into, because I thought it was just such a succinct way of putting it. Um, there is this rap that wellness is orthorexia and it's just diet culture dressed up in another way. And I hear that feedback. And I think that, it certainly can go that way. But there's this other thing around, like body positivity and wellness clashing. And I've always thought, my God, I can see where people are feeling that way, and that wellness is diet culture, and how dare you tell me how to eat, and my body isn't for eating a certain way and looking a certain way. And I've never been able to find the words to say what you said so beautifully, which is, gosh, like I don't eat a certain way or do all these things to look anyway. It started with my mental health, and putting an autoimmune condition into remission. And I just like, I would not be a functioning person if I didn't eat this way. And then, in turn, my skin looks a certain way, my hair looks a certain way. Like I'm sure my weight is in some range because, I'm not eating inflammatory foods. But you said rebel against diet culture, not your own needs. And I just thought that was like, whoa, so
Mm.
powerful. And if you could just speak a little bit to that.
Yeah, I mean, writing that chapter was like this cathartic, like I really needed that for myself to put this experience and all of these subtle thoughts I've had about it all my life, like into words. I needed to encapsulate. I really wrestled with it because it's a sensitive and charged topic. I think that, like, here's a little quick journey on this. There's a lot of both and to this. I think that I started binging in med school partly because I was stressed and had so many unmet emotional needs, like unmet fundamental human needs for community, for purpose, for feeling heard and seen and understood. And I was so unmoored. And that's the psychospiritual dimension. But I also think the part that we're overlooking about the root of eating disorder is that our foods are engineered to be hyper palatable. We have drug-like foods, and that's a soft spot for me. It's sort of like we all have, based on our traumas and our whether or not we're getting our needs met and a little bit of our biology, like this proneness to addiction. And for me, I'm prone to addiction to food. So these engineered foods come in and I hook right into that and I overeat on them and I don't experience satiety and everything gets out of control and it turns into this vicious cycle of like, oh no, I'm out of control. So now I restrict, which makes your brain obsessed with eating. And then you restrict more, then you binge and then you restrict again. And so I went down a really bad path with that. And for me, I had to recognize that even though I couldn't abstain from eating the way an alcoholic can abstain from drinking, kind of lessen the trigger, I could abstain from the drug-like foods. So I had to figure that out for myself. And that was actually my exit ramp from binging. And for me, it was gluten, dairy, sugar, processed foods. And it is restrictive. And that flies in the face of eating disorder treatment orthodoxy, which is everything in moderation, no restriction. And that's a beautiful mindset. But for me, I tried that. But if I would touch one of those drug-like triggers, I'd be back to binging. So that exit ramp allowed me to stop binging and actually do the psychospiritual work of how can I get my fundamental human needs met and be in connection with myself and my purpose and not feel this void that I need to fill with drugs. That said, I think that both and of body positivity and wellness, like there's actually a common root to both. Like orthorexia, body positivity gone awry, it's still our drug-like foods. It's our foods engineered to be hyperpalatable. And you basically see two populations of people work through this predicament in very different ways. In the wellness orthorexia world, we're like, whoa, those foods make me sick. I don't feel well. My brain doesn't work. Like I've become symptomatic with autoimmune issues. I overeat. And we're like, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to restrict and eat in a very intentional way so that things don't feel bad. And that's one approach. And I think in the body positivity world, there's a different way of addressing the problem of addictive foods. They basically say, well, fuck it. Like I tried for years to not overeat on these hyperpalatable foods that created untold amounts of suffering and shame and self-negation and self-punishment, negative thoughts. And so I'm done with that. And I'm going to say, fuck it. I'm going to eat whatever the hell I want. And it's beautiful in spirit, right? There's such a reclamation to that. And it's somebody saying, I'm done with this fight, with this battle. It's not working. So I'm opting out. I'm just going to have no limits. I think the trouble there is that we live in a world where our processed food industry is saying, aha, great. I'm going to keep feeding you addictive foods and you're going to keep championing my cause. And I think what we have to do is actually, yes, push against diet culture and all of those pressures that tell us we should eat in a certain way to keep ourselves small or to self-negate or to be ashamed, like done with all of that. But I think we also have to push against big food and realize that they have been really kind of hijacking our appetites and our satiety and our metabolism and our hormonal balance and creating quite a bit of suffering. And that's why this matters, because it's a beautiful idea to say, I'm done with that battle. But then if you have PCOS and endometriosis and you're not pooping to save your life and you're depressed and anxious and you can't get pregnant, like then you're not winning. And so I think that we just need to find a happy medium where we're done with the diet culture pressure, but we're eating in a way that's coming from a place of radical self-love. We're nourishing our bodies on purpose.
I love that. Thank you for that.
Thanks for the question.
So how do you feel about, I mean, because there's really just so much I want to talk about with you. There's a few things I can't let you go without talking about them. So there were a lot of questions around this. Sleep. And I know that's a giant issue. So I'm actually going to whittle it down into sleep, but this stage of life that a lot of women find themselves in multiple times, which is postpartum, which I don't know, some people are like, they don't sleep for 4 months. For me, I don't sleep with each child for 3 years.
Did you
So
say 3 years?
3 years, yeah, I'm just starting
Oh,
to sleep again. It was both, same with both my kids. Um, that's just how I make them. Um, so yes, we know the importance of sleep. I feel like this crew really knows how, sleeplessness, not enough sleep, how that affects mental health. But what do we do? And there's a few things I want to ask you about postpartum, but what do we do about these months or years that we're mamas and we're nursing in the night and we're co-sleeping or just up? How can we help?
yeah.
What story can
Ooh,
we tell ourselves to make it better?
that one's deep. Okay, so um, so usually I'm controversial in a way that pisses off more conventionally minded people. Today I'm going to be controversial in a way that pisses off my own hippie tribe. So let's think about this. I think that in a way, when it comes to sleep, I love to start as Mr. Fix It and just be like, hey, our body knows how to sleep, it wants to sleep, but modern life is giving us all the wrong signals and it's suppressing our melatonin in the evening because of artificial light after sunset. We have disrupted circadian rhythms. We're not getting tired. We're not sleeping deeply through the night. We don't have energy during the day, rinse and repeat. And so I usually love to really fix somebody's light cues. And that can come down to making sure we get bright sunlight first thing in the morning and during the day. And then seeing the sunset, seeing that gradual transition, and then avoiding exposure to artificial light after sunset to protect our melatonin secretion and protect our circadian rhythm so we can sleep. A lot of other hacks around blood sugar and alcohol and caffeine and bedtime and cold bedroom and white noise. And there's all these Mr. Fix-It things we can do to support sleep. Light is the biggest. Everything else there matters as well. And then that said, not to mention like journaling before bed, writing down your to-do list, avoiding bedtime, like what's it called? Like sleep bedtime procrastination, where we sort of like rebel against.
Hey, I'm obsessed in your book. Can we actually, and again, go read the book because that it was the Chinese term and it was
Revenge, yeah.
yes,
Revenge bedtime
revenge
procrastination.
bedtime procrastination. I realized that that's actually, I feel like what a lot of mamas have.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
bedtime procrastination is our days are not our own. We are serving, whether it's work or children or, dishes or whatever it is. And then by the time you get in bed and you've nursed and you've put everyone to sleep, it's like, you know what? I know all the things about bedtime and blue light and all this, and fuck it. This is my life, and I'm gonna look on Instagram if I want to. I'm
yeah.
gonna go down whatever rabbit hole it is you need to discover. I'm just this term is brilliant.
I think like three ideas around revenge bedtime procrastination itself. One is that like first validate, like, yes, mamas, especially, no time to ourselves. We're always in service. Our lives are not our own. So of course we have that drive to rebel against, like, I know I should go to bed right now, but hey, I need some time to myself. I need to zone out. So we scroll. And then, our attention economy and our ingenious social media apps are like, we're right there ready for you. You're like, here's an addictive
With
one.
the terrible foods that we're
Yeah,
addicted
right,
to.
right. So no stopping cue and brilliant evil genius algorithms that keep us glued. And so I think first just validate why we're doing this. Second is for me, it required 2 steps to stop doing this. And I think I actually, for the most part, have stopped this behavior. One is fiercely, unapologetically carving out time for myself during the day so that my life isn't something I need to rebel against quite so much in the evening. I'll be the first to say sometimes this feels impossible with work, with kids, with household, all of these things. Like we're already not even getting to everything, let alone extra time for like me time. But I do it now so fiercely. And it's like I reclaim time. Am I behind on work? And there are a million emails in my inbox being like, just circling back, still waiting for a response. And I'm like, you know what? I'm taking a 5-minute walk outside. I build these little incremental moments of I am
Revenge self-care.
revenge self-care,
If we can
spaciousness.
put like revenge, I feel like we're more apt to do these behaviors as responsible women if we can just put revenge in there. So let's call it revenge daytime self-care.
There you are with the genius branding, right? So yes, we need revenge self-care during the day, but basically we need the experience of abundance and spaciousness. Even though our lives, there is scarcity, the feeling of spaciousness,
Revenge abundance.
revenge abundance. The other part of this is that I had to realize for myself that, I'd get to the end of everything and it's exactly that hour in the night where it's like, ideally, I would go to bed. And instead, I'm like, well, let me just take a peek at the phone. And then 45 minutes elapses without a blink of the eye. And then I'm overtired when I'm finally getting to bed. So I'm now in a state of cortisol, a second wind, that tired but wired feeling. It's harder to fall asleep. It's harder to sleep deeply. And then the next day, I'm kind of a half zombie the whole day. And then at night, I'm a little bit like, I've had a long, terrible day. Let me look at the phone. Let me scroll, rinse and repeat. So I had to realize that those 45 minutes that felt kind of innocent and minor were squandering my energy and well-being the entire next day. And as a typical woman, I had to frame it as in service of others. We can call that whole framing into question for sure. But I realized I owe to my patients and my daughter to show up as the best version of myself. They are entrusting me with their care. And I want to do right by them. So when I'm a half zombie, I'm not a good doctor. I'm not a good mother. And so I now put the phone down in service of how I feel the next day, but also like I really want to come correct for the people in my life. That's all the bedtime revenge bedtime procrastination story. All of this is under an umbrella, which is that with sleep, first there's all the Mr. Fix-Its. You know it all. Most people in your audience, they know a lot of it, if not all of it. But then there are those times when, for one reason or another, the Mr. Fix-Its don't work. Either it's not working, maybe perimenopause, maybe postpartum has trumped all of those fixes, and hormonal changes just mean you don't sleep. Sometimes it's just life circumstances. You're working the night shift, you have a baby that's still nursing overnight. And so, for one reason or another, Mr. Fix-It is not where it's at for protecting sleep. And then I think what's asked of us is to quickly flip it around and say, we're not trying to fix the sleep. We're trying to, rather than take a sleep deprived, exhausted person and mold them into workaday life, let's accommodate life to the fact that we're not getting consistent, consolidated sleep overnight. This is very true in perimenopause and postmenopausal sleep. I think postpartum sleep is its own story here, where how can we slow down the day so that it can accommodate the fact that we're a little tireder, that maybe we need a nap, that maybe we can't perform at quite all the same, all cylinders running. So that feels a little sometimes impossible, sometimes a disappointment, but I think we actually have to be honest with ourselves about this. There will be phases in life where we're not getting good, solid, consolidated sleep. And can our lives accommodate that?
I like it. It's very, very counterintuitive to how we go about it, which is perimenopausal, menopausal, postpartum, revenge partying at night, like whatever it is we've done, the inclination is to caffeinate to keep up.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I like it. Flip
Fit
it.
ourselves into the mold. I said at the beginning I was going to piss off my hippie tribe, and I never did. I never went there.
You want
I
to
could,
get them? Do you
I,
want to
I
just
could,
throw
I
something out?
could just leave that. I could leave that out of the conversation. What I was going to bring forth is this really delicate balance around sleep training, which is a delicate question, right? No one can tell. Like mothers know what they need to do for their children. So, like, I'll be the first to admit, nobody could tell me what I needed to do for my daughter. And I can't tell anybody else what they need to do for their kids. Like, only you really know. But I think that we can sometimes get attached to an idea of this is what's best for my kids. And then it turns out, because of all the sacrifices that happen in the wake of that choice, it's net not what's best for our kids, or not what's best globally for the whole household. So once in a while, I think it's worth just reconsidering our choices. It's not to say like everybody needs to sleep train, but I've certainly had a patient she was suicidal from chronic sleep deprivation. And she was so committed to that gentle attachment parenting and nursing on demand overnight. And we did the really difficult soul searching decision together for her to sleep train her child. And it was a tough decision. She really felt strongly about kind of the reasons why she wasn't doing that. And then that for her, in her circumstances, ended up being the right path forward. And even though there was like a cry it out process, which can be brutal, um, in the end, her daughter was getting a much more intact version of my patient could show up as a better mom. She was okay. Her needs matter too, not just in service of the child, but us as individuals, as moms, our needs matter. And so their household was improved by the sleep training decision. But a lot of times, I don't think it's a straightforward question. I think there are pros and cons to both
Yeah.
options. And we only know what's right for us, but I always invite us to reconsider based on changing circumstances.
And I feel like age might have something to do with it. I had my first child in my 20s. And I think in our culture, like most people are partying really hard and working really hard, and like all of that energy is being used in that way. For me, it was parenting and working. I was able to nurse and produce tons of milk and nurse all night and co-sleep and then get up really early and go to work and take my baby with me to work for a lot of it. And it worked, I had that like party stamina. And having my last child in my late 30s, I was like, whoa, it was humbling. I was not prepared. I thought I kind of had the stamina to keep up. And my husband went on tour when she was 4 months old.
Um,
And just the two kids, the working, the sleeplessness, I quickly went into, oh my God, this is that postpartum mania that you hear about. It's not postpartum depression, but these are like, I'm driving the car and I'm thinking it would be a lot easier to drive the car into the wall than to keep going through my day.
yeah.
And that was just like exhausting and mania.
Yeah.
But also
And
it feels like age played into that.
of course, I mean, in a way, part of what that is your brain saying, I am running on fumes. And we have more robust reserves when we're younger, and we are depleted progressively as we get older, not to mention the fact that by the time you're having your second, you've already had one child. So that's a big depletion. And so, I mean, I think that all of this is to say, like, what you just brought up there, which like I just want to applaud you for being honest about that, because a lot of people hold that as a very shameful secret, even though it's really common to have dark thoughts like that in the postpartum period. And it's serious, it can be dangerous and terrifying. And we need to be talking about it, normalizing it, all of that, and supporting moms. It's too much to ask of people. Like, husband on tour, two kids working, baby crying, like the exhaustion. It's so relentless. And there is something really funky about the fact that we are parenting in isolated silos.
Yeah.
I am a sort of ancestral lens cliche in this respect, but I really do believe we used to parent in community.
Yeah.
And it's the only way to make this
It is.
journey bearable. And I think that when we do it alone, it is too hard. It's too much.
100%. And then, you talked about something else that, again, broken record, but do go read the book where you get into it more. But you talk about this postpartum depression has really been brought out into the culture. And I feel like we had celebrities that came out 15, 20 years, like whatever it's been that we've been talking about it, like on the cover of People Mag, like I had postpartum depression. And so this is something that has been normalized and people are wary of. You bring up this other thing, postpartum anxiety, that's different. And I feel like I've had postpartum anxiety with both of my babies, and it's not postpartum depression. It's this other like hypervigilance, and everybody keeps telling you sleep when the baby sleeps, and you're like, sleep when the baby sleeps. I'm so fucking jacked up. I can't even sleep at night. And like it's kind of cute because you're staring at your baby and like so in love, but it also gets crazy because you don't sleep and there is no relaxing. Can you
Yeah.
walk us through the difference between the two?
Yeah, so I'm going to structure. I think I have three thoughts on this. And I think one is that, like, when you give birth, it's the way I make sense of it for myself is it's almost like you develop this new gyrus in your brain that is for thinking about potential negative consequences as it relates to your child. And so you just like have a new bulb in your brain that's like, oh God, oh no, what about this? Are they breathing? And so we have to just recognize that it is part of how our brain changes when we become responsible for a really dependent, helpless little being. And I think for me, like if I have a hot take on postpartum depression and anxiety, it's that this is it's a cry for help from our brains on a number of different dimensions. And some of that is about our fundamental needs, like um, support and feeling seen and understood, and just like being intact people as we go through our lives. And some of that is nutritional. And I mean, sleep is a big thing. That's the one that's not always so fixable. Nutrition, I think we can work at that because in modern life, we are, so many of us, constantly a bit overfed, a little undernourished. And it's hard to be fully nourished in the modern food landscape, even in the best of circumstances. If we're really intentional with food, it's still tough because our food is depleted of nutrients and minerals because our soil is. So it's really hard to be fully nourished when you grow a baby in your body and then birth it, and often you're hemorrhaging blood in labor, and then you might even be feeding it from your body, that is depletion, depletion, depletion. In Chinese medicine, there's such an appreciation for like the way qi is held in our blood, in our breast milk, and how this is the expensive currency of our energy. And we're just pissing it out in every direction when we grow and feed, birth and feed a baby. And so we've just lost so much of that energy currency and we need to build it back. And nutrition is part of that. So we're already starting from a nutritional debt. And then we're tired. We have no time to ourselves. How are we supposed to feed ourselves nourishing food? And I think this is where our culture has really failed us. And you'll see sort of more Asian traditions around like other people come in with soups and stews. And basically, a recognition of mom doesn't have time or energy, but she does need to be nourished right now. So let's support her. And instead, we're here just being like moms crying baby in one hand, like dialing up seamless in the other hand, and not nourishing ourselves as it's too hard. So I think we do need to replete our nutrients. And I think that's a part of why our brains are saying everything is not firing right here. And I think that there's one other thing I wanted to add there about postpartum anxiety. I think I forgot it. We'll see if it comes back.
I'll come back. I'll come back. Okay, and then gosh, I mean, okay.
Oh, I remember it if it's okay.
Yeah, please.
So it's just that we have a bigger cultural conversation about postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety. And it's good. Like, I don't want the stigma. I don't want suffering in silence or shame. It's good that we're talking about it. What ends up happening is that we basically say, see somebody, go on meds. And meds can be helpful and sometimes super necessary in this circumstance. But it is a little bit of basically your body saying, the check engine light is on. And we're basically saying, well, just put a piece of duct tape over that check engine light. No more check engine light. And I think sometimes it's not fundamentally honoring or addressing the way our body is screaming, I'm not okay. And I prefer to listen for what are the ways this mom is not okay. Does she not have support? Is she not getting her needs met? Is she nutritionally deficient? Is she inflamed? Whatever is going on. I just want to investigate, identify, address the real causes of imbalance, rather than just sort of like suppressing the symptom and hiding the body's mechanism for communicating something is not right here.
Yeah. Amen.
Mm.
Yes. Okay, I'm whittling it down to my last question for you. I mean, there's so many, and I don't know. So I'm going to throw it to you. Would you rather, for our last one before we go into the community cues, would you rather talk about GABA or lymph?
Ooh, As you can see, being concise is not my strong suit. So
No, I mean, nor is it mine, and I'm the one that's like trying to keep us on the rails here, so which is a joke. But
I'm going to talk quickly about both.
okay, yay. All right.
Quickly. Okay, so GABA, it's just, we've been talking about serotonin. That's the neurotransmitter we talk about. We also need to talk about GABA. It is our primary inhibitory neurotransmitter in our central nervous system. And that's what pulls us out of an anxiety spiral. That's what helps us feel calm and okay, safe, able to trust. And I think of GABA as an endangered species in modern life for a number of reasons. Some of it's nutritional, some of it's chronic stress. A lot of it has to do with the decimation of our gut flora because there are certain Bacteroides species in our digestive tract that help us manufacture GABA. And so, for missing those microbes, we're missing that sort of source of GABA. And then there are substances that we consume in modern life that also really impact our GABA functioning negatively, and that's alcohol and the benzodiazepines. So things like Xanax, Klonopin, Ativan. This is tricky business, but I think overall we just want to be thinking about how do we support GABA functioning in our body. And I think that, it's for me, it's a big part of how I understand why alcohol contributes to anxiety. You mentioned the term anxiety, which I should have spelled it with a G. I spelled it Hanz. I don't know why, but anxiety is like when you're hungry and anxious, and that's very valid, but you can also be hungover and anxious. And that's where we just need to appreciate that the brain likes alcohol. We like alcohol because it gives us a lot of GABA, so we're relaxed. And if the story ended there, I would say alcohol is a good treatment for anxiety. But in an attempt to protect survival and homeostasis, the story doesn't end there. And our brain converts that GABA into a different neurotransmitter called glutamate, which is excitatory. So that's why if you've had a few drinks at dinner, you wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning, racing thoughts, a little panicky, and you toss a turn for the second half of the night, that's related to a different kind of anxiety, which is the fallout from alcohol. And it has to do with it. It's kind of we're negatively impacting the GABA signaling in our brain, which cumulatively over time leaves us more anxious. And so we want to really protect and keep our GABA functioning juicy. And that has to do with consuming fermented foods, protecting our gut health, avoiding unnecessary antibiotics, really nutrient dense diet, plenty of relaxation, as if we can manage that, and then minimizing the things that damage our GABA signaling, like alcohol and the benzodiazepines, which is its own conversation because they can be habit forming. And you don't want to stop them precipitously because they can actually have a lethal withdrawal. So that's something to work with a practitioner with if you are taking them regularly.
I'm going to say that was pretty concise.
Sort of. Okay.
Considering the amount there is to say, glymph and lymph, and how that affects mood and brain function.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically, that's a sort of short story, but for a long time, we thought we have our lymph system in our body. That's what's removing waste and detoxifying the body. And we thought the brain was somehow siphoned off from the system and didn't have lymphatic drainage. And that's, of course, crazy and ridiculous. These are cells that have activity and they create waste products, and our body has a system for removing that. So in the brain, it's called the glymphatic system because it's related to our glial cells in our brain. And it does most of its work when we're sleeping. And this is really important because in modern life, so many of us are in a state of chronic sleep deprivation. So our glymphatic system just has a incomplete workday. It doesn't get to do its job completely. And then rather than cleaning out all of the accumulated waste products of a day's thinking and cognition, it starts to accumulate and we get residue in our brain. There's an extrapolation that you can draw to things like the tau oligomers, the residues that you see in dementia. But you also can just look at it as why we feel lousy the next day after a bad night of sleep. So it's just one more reason to motivate us to, when possible, when Mr. Fix-It is the right approach, to how to support our sleep. And when that's not possible, don't worry about the glymphatic system. Live your life, let your life adjust to this. It's temporary. You strike the balance you need in your life.
Okay. Also concise. Thank you. Okay, so going into our lightning round here. and this one's really tough, and I always feel so bad asking genius people with so much to say to like whittle it down to a lightning round, but it's also fun.
Will I say less or will I just speak faster? We'll see.
Let's see. I'm open to both. Okay. Anxiety and age. Why does it feel like it comes on more in the 20s? Does this have something to do with hormones and age? That was the question I'm going to add in. Or is that there's more, is it age and hormones, or is it that there's more true anxiety, or what do you think? Or is there a story for actually false anxiety ramping up with?
Um, oh man, definitely not lightning for me, but I think that I'm not sure. If anything, I think any given individual has experienced an increased anxiety with an increase in age because our world has created an increase in both false and true anxieties in the recent past. So I don't necessarily think like 40 somethings are more anxious than 18-year-olds. If anything, I think 18-year-olds these days are actually more anxious than 40 somethings. But I think each of us has experienced an increase in our anxiety of late. And I think that relates to all the increase in false anxieties. We're more inflamed, more EMFs, more social media, more blue light, less sleep, less nutrition, more hormone imbalance, et cetera, more medication, which creates all kinds of its own imbalances. So I think false anxiety has increased. And I think true anxiety, viscerally connected to the pandemic, to racial injustice, to climate change. Like we are all much more tuned in to what's really fucked up in our world. And I think that that has increased. And so, or at least for some of these topics, awareness has increased. And so I think true anxiety is more as well.
Yeah, okay, fair. Top vitamins or supplements to help with false anxiety.
I try to be pretty minimal on supplements. I think that for a couple of reasons. One is like I don't want to distract from the fact that we really get our nutrients from food. So with anxiety, I love to have people supplement magnesium at bedtime. Um, Everyone's dose is a little bit different, but basically this is safe. This has other benefits. It can help with sleep, but it can also help with menstrual cramps and migraine headaches and digestion and muscle tension. And it's just a good thing to do. We're all deficient in it because our food is, because our soil is. So I love people to take magnesium. For some people, I like turmeric. I like to sort of tell the immune system to recalibrate using curcumin, which is the active ingredient in turmeric. I'll have a lot of patients, I'll put on B vitamins initially.
It's a game changer for
Critical,
ag
critical.
vitamins.
Long game, I like to sort of have a therapeutic phase where we're using supplements to replete depleted B vitamins. And then down the road to sort of transition over to things like if someone eats meat, like chicken liver, like these sort of natural sources of the B vitamins or egg yolks. But sometimes the supplement is just always necessary. And certainly it's helpful in that ramp up phase. And in particular, like intentional methylated B vitamins, because a lot of us have the MTHFR mutation, which kind of gives us a handicap in our ability to methylate B vitamins. And then I'm not like putting everyone on a probiotic. I'm usually encouraging them to consume fermented foods and starchy tubers, but once in a while, we're doing a more dedicated gut healing protocol. So there might be a phase where we're using an antimicrobial, a phase where we're repleting with a probiotic, a phase where we're healing the gut with glutamine and collagen. So it just depends. That's like a more involved thing. But I'm not just putting everybody kind of because sometimes people have SIBO or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So taking a probiotic in that circumstance can even be exacerbating. So there's a lot of nuance to the whole gut protocol. Those are some of my go-tos.
Okay, thank you. Yes, the methylated B12 for me, and it remains, and maybe it's a dietary thing. I'm not vegan, but it's, I'm not going for the chicken liver the way I should.
It's hard.
I make myself eat oysters sometimes,
Yeah, that's a
and
great source of zinc.
preferred organ meat, I guess. But again, I'm doing that really, and it's like if I'm somewhere where there are oysters, I'll do that. Yeah, when I'm feeling really depleted, I actually supplement organ, like grass fed, or I can't do it. And I really do
Yeah.
use it medicinally, which is even tough for me, but I have done that. But
Utmost sympathy. I don't enjoy eating liver. I really don't, but I do feel better when I do, and I like it in pill form.
yeah. But yeah, that methylated B12, I mean, I take some every day just in drink form with ting, and it really is when I'm off it and I get back on the daily. I mean, my brain just, it's like I'm living in color again.
Yes. Yeah. We
Incredible.
need the B12 and the methylated folate. And I'll just add because it's on some people's minds. Like some people, I'll point them towards things like ashwagandha or rhodiola. Those sort of adaptogens can be really supportive in the right circumstances. And I always get asked about melatonin. And I would say melatonin is great for jet lag. It's really helpful in that circumstance. But overall, my approach to sleep is melatonin isn't a sleep aid. It's a tell your brain what time of day it is aid. And I like to tell the brain what time of day it is based on the time of day, which is part of what modern life screws up for us. And it tells us, we're indoors during the day, so we lack that signal of that it's daytime. And then we're surrounded by a psychedelic light show of overhead lighting and laptop and phone at night. And so we're telling our brain that the sun is out when it's actually bedtime. And so that's why many people find melatonin helpful, but I just prefer to get really old fashioned and make sure that we're actually giving our brain that signal of darkness after sunset so that we can secrete our own homegrown melatonin. But jet lag, where the time of day is totally helter skelter with like what your body knows to be true, melatonin is so clutch.
We're calling you old fashioned, Dr. Vora. You
I'll
like
take it.
lights out at night. Okay, perimenopause. And we got a lot of perimenopause anxiety questions.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it's tough. Like, I love to solve problems. I love to be like, you can't sleep. Here are blue blocking glasses. Now you can sleep. Problem solved. Thank you. Good night. Perimenopause is not a problem I can solve.
Mhm.
It's by definition like it's hard for natural selection to select for adaptations to menopause because it's by definition post-reproductive. So if one person had a fluke mutation that made their body adapted to have a better menopause, there's no way to select for that trait. So it dies with them. And so basically, it's a waning of our hormones, and hormones are powerful. They affect our mood and our energy and our sleep and our outlook. And those changes are rough. That's why kids going through puberty there's no way to solve that. And there's no way to solve this version of puberty on the way out. And I think if anything, it's to give ourselves so much grace, so much gentleness and spaciousness and support, and to like really just give ourselves compassion that we're going through a lot, and can we have a little more spaciousness to process what's coming up? It's not a Mr. Fix-It solution. It's in the realm of like there's nothing wrong with us, but it's a lot to move through. And I think cultural attitudes around like telling us our youth is our value, like we need to drop that and to recognize like how wisdom is part of our value, and how empathy and having gone through something difficult is part of our value. And so to just reframe around this is not just a negative thing, this comes with positives as well.
And would you ever look into hormone therapy? Is that something you're into?
So it's something that I refer out for. And I think that it's really individual, and it has to do with risk factors. It has to do with you're balancing risks and benefits. And so I'm not dogmatically opposed to it at all. And I've had many patients that I've pointed them towards a naturopath or a functional medicine doctor who's done bioidentical hormone replacement. It's been really supportive. So I think it can be a good thing.
Okay, cool. Um, Back to our PCOS
Yes.
question.
Haven't forgotten. Yeah.
PCOS anxiety. What is it?
Yeah, so polycystic ovary syndrome, I had it. I had it. and, was told with absolutely no bedside manner when I was 22 years old, like, you have PCOS and you'll be infertile. And I was just like, sorry, what? And it really was the watershed moment that sent me down a path that made me a functional medicine doctor, because it was a real head scratcher moment for me. I lacked the vocabulary. I did not yet understand the concept of functional medicine or root cause resolution rather than symptom suppression. But it did catch me off balance. And I was like, I'm the product of 500 generations or so of successful reproduction. Why did it stop with me? Doesn't seem genetic, seems environmental. And so
Mhm.
it helped me understand, like, I thought I was doing everything right. I was literally in med school at the time, being taught, here's how to eat well, here's how to be healthy. And I was like running and eating skinless chicken breast and skim milk. And I was like, I'm doing everything right. Why is my body falling apart? And I had to recognize, like, there was so much more to the story in terms of how to support a body. And what we were being taught in allopathic medical school was lost the plot a long time ago. So it helped me understand how to nourish myself, how to manage stress, how to get my hormones in balance. And so I think that for anyone struggling with PCOS, don't give up hope. I really, truly, madly, deeply believe this is a disease that has, or a syndrome that has, yes, a genetic predisposition, but much more importantly, an environmental piece that's influencing it and making you manifest with these symptoms. So focus on the environmental piece. It's a little different for everyone. Stress matters, avoiding endocrine disruptors matters. I think for a lot of people, insulin resistance is a factor. So, doing our best to avoid refined carbohydrates and artificial sugars and all the sort of added sugars of the world. And then I think inflammation has a really big impact on PCOS. And for me, that came down to gluten, conventional American gluten, and the industrially processed seed and vegetable oils. So that's things like canola oil, corn oil, soybean oil. And I had to minimize them in my diet to decrease inflammation, to heal from PCOS. So we're all a little bit different. For some people, dairy is a big piece. For some people, it is a lot about stress, can be about trauma. Um, but like that, those are the places to look, is opening up drainage pathways, decreasing inflammation, supporting nutrition, avoiding endocrine disruptors, and just kind of plugging along with faith that you can get your body back into balance.
Yeah. And with those seed oils and inflammation, there was this really fun moment when it felt like, oh my God, there's all this grain-free organic junk food now. It's keto, it's grain-free. Yes. And then you realize that all of them have seed oils. So
Yeah.
if you're out there partying on grain-free keto junk food, just look for the seed oils and then go Google seed oils and get into all of that. Turns
Yeah.
out no junk food is free.
Yeah. Which isn't to say we have to be obsessive all the time. Like, I
No.
will eat the occasional this kind of thing. Seed oils are ubiquitous. It's really hard to avoid them altogether. But we have to strike this balance where we are nourishing ourselves from a place of self-love, not from a place of self-negation or fear or feeling fragile, but like a place of, like, this feels joyous, this feels achievable, and it's still delicious and convenient. I can share it and experience with the people that I love, and it's affordable. It's a delicate balance to strike. We all have to kind of navigate that for ourselves, but it can be done.
Mhm. And I think also, just where you are in your journey. I had years in the beginning of my journey where it's like I have anxiety or brain fog or an autoimmune condition that like has me in bed. And there are points in your life, in your journey, where you're just so desperate to feel good that limiting those things makes sense. And then I always feel like with wellness and with the journey, the point is to actually like get up, be resilient, be as loose and free as you can. And like I like to take it to the edge. I'm like, I'm so healed, I'm so well. I'm gonna have pizza and ice cream and like wine because that's and like I take it to the edge until I feel like, okay, not working. But it's like always that dance, dial it up, dial it down, feel the inflammation roving through your body.
I'm so glad you brought this up. And I think perhaps it's part of like how we can close also is that there is like wellness, optimal wellness is not the goal in and of itself. It's really just that a lot of us, the reason someone might be watching right now, certainly for you and me, we were struggling in our lives because our body was out of balance. And that made it really hard to lead a fulfilling life. So those were the phases when we had to roll up our sleeves and make sacrifices and put quite a bit of effort into getting back in balance so that our health can recede into the background and no longer be a foreground issue. And then you can just go forth and lead your fulfilling life, whatever that looks like. If that's purpose, if that's fabrics and fruit and sex, it's you want to just create the conditions that your health is in the background as a foundation to allow you to lead your fulfilling life. If you're really unwell, then it's worth quite a bit of effort. And if you're okay, it's not worth quite a lot of effort. And then it's absolutely a dance because you can feel well and then you can do the pizza and then you don't feel so well and then you do a little bit more and you just keep dancing with it, but not from a place of like, why did I do that? I need to punish myself. But just like that was fun. And now I got a new reminder that my body doesn't feel great when I do that. And so next time I'm going to do something slightly differently or not, but just to keep listening.
You and I have both experienced, and just to remind people that the body's incredible, the mind is incredible. You can pull yourself back from the depths of hell, what really feels like this is it, you're beyond fixing, can absolutely pull yourself back. So, the fear around like having pizza or ice cream or, eating too late or not sleeping enough, whatever it is, rather than spin out about it, I always keep the thing in mind of like, I can fix this in 3 days. Might be like a little off for max 3 days. You can always rein it in and
Yeah.
recalibrate.
Yeah. Is there like a final
Yeah, there's like
community
a
question?
final 20.
Final 20.
Okay, no, there is a final one. And I'm going to throw it out to you, what you feel like you want to take as the last one. We had a few questions around, when I had my own questions around the vagal nerve. So one of them was just, 5 ways to tone the vagus nerve. And I personally would love to hear this because I have taken to gagging myself with my tongue scraper. I'd love to just like, kind of do it. Um, what about, so that, and then somebody had a question around vasovagal fainting associated with needles. And I thought that was an outlier question. And then we had 4 people ask the same thing.
Ooh, okay. Let's do this.
Okay. And then we'll really end. And I'm gonna put my little book away.
Okay, and then we'll do this part two.
Okay.
So I think that vagal stuff. So I feel old about this. Like I did my training and then rebelled against my training and then did all this additional training and like was like, I know how to do functional medicine and integrative psychiatry. And then I got all settled into that. And all the young whippersnappers were like, vagal toning. And I'm like, well, I'm too old and too busy to learn this. So I don't feel like I think other people I follow on Instagram are doing such profound, amazing work. And I learn from them. So I would say I'm not the expert on this. What I found in my own life for vagal toning, cold showers and cold plunging for sure. Gargling and chanting and humming is like a slightly gentler practice than gagging, but
Yes, let's hum, not gag.
so like a nice saltwater gargle or just chanting, humming, singing, like all of that is like very nice and vagal toning. And for me, one thing that made a huge difference is I have a physical therapist I work with who does something called functional manual therapy. And he actually helped kind of like my vagus nerve or my vagal nerves were kind of entrapped in strictures, basically pathological holding fascial patterns in my body. And so he did a lot of work around here and it really unlocked it for me. So it was a kind of musculoskeletal impact on my vagus nerve that could have been, that was able to be opened up. And so that helped me with certain vagal issues just on a musculoskeletal basis. And I think a lot about how we're hunched over our screens, our laptops, our phones, and it's making all this constricture. So that's one pathway. I also had that thought when I saw the first question come through about vasovagal fainting with needles, and then more came through, and I was like, okay, we have to address this. I don't think I have this figured out. For any patient that wants to bring this up with me, I would think a lot about how do you come into that appointment really physiologically intact, like hydrated, but properly hydrated with minerals, with electrolytes, not just tap water. And then like not in a stress response, so not hopped up on caffeine, not sleep deprived, not coming out of an internet rabbit hole, but like in a calm state of mind. But then I think there was like a psycho-spiritual truth coming through with the fact that this is on a lot of people's minds. I think we're going through something right now in our relationship to allopathic medicine, which like kind of phallically comes at us with needles. And so I think there's a reckoning happening here. So don't think of yourself as broken or wrong. Explore and be curious about what your body might be communicating to you about that. That's a bigger conversation, but I would say just always explore the thematic content that's coming through in a phobia. And sometimes we actually just need to repattern and do exposure response prevention. Sometimes we need to listen to and honor the phobia. So it's a little bit tricky. It depends on the person.
I love that. I have also had this with needles, and I've come around because I regularly give a lot of blood to just stay on top of my stuff. And so
Yeah.
I've actually had to come around, even though I still do it laying down. So the little tips and tricks is I do it laying down if you have to get blood taken or um some type, a shot. Like I'm trying to think of what injections. I mean, like a vitamin injection.
B12. Yeah.
I do it standing up against a wall. I do it in the butt. So like hands up against the wall. There's something I actually like about standing and leaning against the wall rather than giving blood and laying down. But the thing that has been really helpful is, like you said, coming with a full stomach. So eating and focusing on protein. And then right before I do it, I'll actually chug juice
Yeah.
and like really it's the only time I'll spike my
Yeah.
blood sugar because my fear response seems to just you can tell us actually what's happening, but it feels like it like metabolizes all the sugar and then I have nothing left and I get sweaty and my hands
Yes.
and I feel like I'm gonna pass out. Sugar, like really pound of juice.
I think those are great strategies. I have to run to a patient call, so I'll say a final thought on that, which is that with needles, with all of this, like there's a real physical dynamic that's happening there, and we need to feel empowered in the medical setting. Like when we feel bullied or pushed or rushed or our concerns are dismissed, if no one's advocating for us, if we can't advocate for ourselves, like I think we can feel really vulnerable and it can trigger a lot of different things in those settings. So to kind of make sure you're working with a practitioner who's not pushing, dismissing, and validating, I think that it's easier said than done. I think that the medical system is so broken and I was in this system and I'm sure I did that kind of dismissive thing that we're almost inadvertently trained to do. It's part of how rushed we are and how we don't have our needs met as practitioners. But I think that you want to just slow down and be like, wait, I'm feeling disenfranchised right now and I need to feel understood and heard.
Yeah,
And so keep kind of fighting for that and put a little bit of market demand on practitioners slowing down and being gentle with patients. I
which
hope
is
that's helpful.
probably not the Quest technician that's going to take your blood. It may be worth investing in a visit. Why am I spacing on what the phlebotomist, getting a really like gentle, loving phlebotomist to come to your home if your phobia is standing in the way of like true diagnostics that you feel you need. It's worth
Right.
it.
Okay.
I
Amanda,
appreciate your time so much. Thank you.
I This is an honor. And this was such a good conversation. To your credit, to your audience, to all these good questions. You guys like really brought forth so many different ways of thinking about anxiety. And so I'm really grateful to have gotten to have this conversation.
Thank you
I'm
for your
looking forward to part two.
time. Yes, definitely part two. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. Have a
Bye.
good one.
You
Bye,
too.
everyone.